Okay, joining us now is Glenn Kirschner, an MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor. We've also got Chris Liu. He served as Deputy Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration and is currently a senior fellow at the University of Virginia Miller Center. Robert Costa is an MSNBC political analyst and national political reporter for the Washington Post. And Jessica Roth, here with me at the table, is a former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. And Bob Costa, my friend, I want to start with you on the politics of this here, because our White House team is hearing that Acosta is catching heat not just from Democrats, but also from people inside the White House who feel that Acosta hasn't done enough to push the Trump agenda at the Labor Department, and that the Epstein fallout could actually provide a pretext to push Acosta toward the exits. But what are your sources inside the White House telling you, not just about the growing pressure on Acosta, but more importantly, where the president stands on all of this?
Based on my conversations with Trump advisors, Mr. Acosta, Secretary Acosta, and Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff, have had tensions in recent months about the pace of deregulation at the Department of Labor. Mick Mulvaney, coming out of the House of Representatives, a conservative hardliner, he would like to see more done, has been frustrated with Acosta at times and how things have proceeded on policy. The president is aware of this, but he also likes Acosta personally in the sense that he sees him as a loyal, hard worker, someone who doesn't steal the spotlight from the president. So at this moment, some Trump confidants say the president's going to let this play out. But if it plays out in an unfavorable way toward the secretary, he could walk away. We've seen this with previous administration officials. This process take its time, and ultimately the official could step away.
Yeah, the Scott Pruitt comes to mind, right, where the president dug in for weeks and weeks and weeks until he eventually just gave up. But Glenn Kirschner, I want to turn to you because you posted something on Twitter that caught my eye this morning. You say the available evidence makes it clear that Secretary Acosta should be investigated for criminally conspiring to violate something called the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, Jeff, let's briefly walk through this together. So the Crime Victims' Rights Act, also referred to as the Victims' Bill of Rights, is in the federal code. It's 18 U.S.C. 3771. Here is the most important subsection. It says that victims, quote, have the right to be informed in a timely manner of any plea bargain or deferred prosecution agreement. That would be the non-prosecution agreement in this case. Now, the Miami Herald, doing some great reporting, got some email traffic between then U.S. Attorney Acosta and Epstein's legal team, namely Jeffrey J. Lefkowitz. And here's what the email reads. Quote, in a letter sent by Lefkowitz memorializing the meeting, the Miami Herald reported that he thanked Acosta for working out a deal that included a commitment by the U.S. Attorney not to contact any of the individuals identified, the potential witnesses, or the potential civil claimants. That would be the victims. Jeff, that is more than just a smoking gun, showing that Acosta conspired with Lefkowitz and perhaps others to violate the Crime Victims' Rights Act. It might as well be a surveillance video of Acosta at the firing range, unloading, figuratively speaking, and killing the rights of these crime victims. That really indicates an investigation must be opened into what Acosta did to deny these victims their rights back in 2008.
And Jessica Roth, the Acosta is defending himself, and I want to read for you a few of the tweets that he put out yesterday and get your reaction. So he says this: with the evidence available more than a decade ago, federal prosecutors insisted that Epstein go to jail, register as a sex offender, and put the world on notice that he was a sexual predator. Now that new evidence and additional testimony is available, the New York prosecution offers an important opportunity to more fully bring him to justice. But look, the Miami Herald investigative reporter Julie K. Brown, she spent more than 2 years investigating this case and interviewing at least 60 women and girls who say that Epstein sexually abused them. She responded directly to Acosta's tweet, and she says this. She says, except the record shows you had the evidence in 2007. Remember the 53-page indictment, the phone records, the trash pulls, the flight manifests, the witnesses who worked for Epstein? So what's your take on that and the point that Glenn just made?
So Secretary Acosta seems to be taking the position in those tweets, as he has previously, that the reason he went forward with the non-prosecution agreement that he did was because the evidence was somehow lacking. And therefore, the deal that he got, which was really very lenient and unusual in many respects, was sort of the best outcome under the circumstances, because it ensured that Epstein at least went to jail for some period of time and that he registered as a sex offender. The problem is that it's really hard to reconcile that position with the evidence that's come to light subsequently through the reporting from the Miami Herald and through other sources, including litigation, in civil litigation in Florida and elsewhere brought by the victims. It does seem that there was extensive evidence available, sufficient for his line prosecutors to draft that indictment that was over 50 pages that included multiple serious federal felonies. So although there does in fact appear to be new evidence, the U.S. Attorney in New York said as much, it's not clear that the evidence was insufficient at the time in Florida, and I think that Acosta's going to have to do more explaining.
Yeah. Hey, Chris Lu, I want to draw on your experience as the former Deputy Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration, because the Labor Department, it turns out, actually has a role in coordinating anti-human trafficking efforts, but apparently the Trump administration is rolling that back. Is that right?
Well, that's exactly right. The Department of Labor is one of the lead federal agencies in fighting trafficking, not only here in the United States, but around the world. It puts out an annual report on child labor and forced labor around the world. And here in the United States, labor inspectors are often the first people on the scene who encounter victims of trafficking. And just in the past 2 weeks, this Labor Department under Alex Acosta both put a moratorium on granting temporary visas to victims of trafficking and has now added an additional bureaucratic step in the process that might potentially delay for weeks and even months these victims getting protection. And already when you're inspecting workplaces and you're relying on undocumented immigrants who might be witnesses, they're going to be reluctant to come forward. Now that you make it more difficult for them to get protection, it's less likely they'll come forward. And obviously, when you're dealing with trafficking, time is of the essence. These people can be shifted around to other places. And the irony of all this is that Donald Trump has tried to say that fighting human trafficking is one of his highest priorities, and yet his Secretary of Labor seems to be taking steps that go in the opposite direction.
And speaking of President Trump, Bob Costa, the president, is trying to distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein. Take a look at this.
Anybody else?
Jeffrey Epstein is a terrific guy.
Well, I knew him like everybody in Palm Beach knew him. I mean, people in Palm Beach knew him. He was a fixture in Palm Beach. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan. I was not, a long time ago. I'd say maybe 15 years. I was not a fan of his. That I can tell you. I was not a fan of his.
So the president says he's not a fan of Epstein, says they had a falling out some time ago. Does that hold up, Bob?
The president knew Jeffrey Epstein going back decades in Palm Beach, as he said. But there was some kind of business dealing that created a falling out situation about a decade ago. I've spoken to Sam Nunberg, a former Trump campaign advisor, who said that even when President Trump launched his campaign for president in 2015, he was asked about Epstein by some of his advisors, and he said, oh, that relationship has fallen apart. But that doesn't take away the fact that they did have a relationship, a friendship that was there in the early 90s, the mid 90s, the late 90s, as they were both fixtures in Palm Beach.
And Epstein, Jessica, as we all know, he's pleaded not guilty. So where does this case head next?
So the very next thing that's scheduled is the bail hearing before the judge who's been assigned the case, Judge Berman, and that's happening on July 15th. The government has already made clear they're seeking detention pre-trial. Obviously, his attorneys are going to fight that. The government already put in an extensive memorandum explaining its reasons for seeking detention, including his extensive international contacts, his fairly minimal U.S. contacts, his extraordinary wealth and means actually to flee, should he so choose. And they also interestingly talked about evidence of attempts to obstruct justice in the past, and a concern that he might do so, try to intimidate witnesses were he to remain out of custody. So the next big thing will be that bail hearing on July 15th. Because one of the factors that the court will consider is also the strength of the government's evidence, we're going to hear more from the government about that evidence, including the corroborating evidence of the victim's testimony. I'm sure we'll hear more about those, what appear to be hundreds of photographs of nude or partially nude women, some perhaps underage females, that were found during the search warrants of his residence contemporaneous with his arrest. So that bail hearing is going to be very interesting, not solely on the issue of bail, but about the evidence.
Yeah, July 15th.
Yes.
Mark it down. Okay.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.